Hey everyone! I am back with a new video, and this is going to be a marker comparison video. I get asked a lot about Copic marker alternatives, and while I would love to do an in-depth video on that, I simply can't because I have not tried all the different brands of alcohol-based markers out there, but I did have some experience with two brands of markers that I used before investing on the Copic markers that I use now, and I will be talking about those two brands in this video. So we've got the Touch Twin markers here, the Copic Chows, and the Bic Market markers. I actually started with the Bic markers for my first alcohol-based markers, then I upgraded to the Touch Twin markers before deciding that I really wanted the Copics. And before even purchasing the brand, I feel like I already trusted it. I knew that I was going to like it since I read a lot of different reviews, and most of them mentioned things I was looking for in a marker. So the way that this video is going to go is I have chosen similar colors from the three different brands. I based it around the colors I already had for my Touch Twin markers, and those were mostly the bright colors. Luckily, I also had some bright markers for my Bic, and in the end, all I had to do was match those colors with the Copic colors I already had. So we can see here already that the Touch and Copic markers are double-ended with the chisel nib as an option, whereas the Bic marker only has one nib, and that is the fine bullet nib. This video is also going to be a bit of a challenge because I only have these colors to work with, and it might not be the best basis to test out how these colors blend well together because there are no colors that are in the same family. I mean, I do have two shades of blue, a turquoise and an ultramarine blue, but even those are pretty far from each other, and there's no middle color to help the two colors transition, therefore creating that smooth blend. But I will try and work with these markers to show you their quality and whether they do have a blending capability. Also, just to mention before diving into the demonstration is that it should be taken note of that the orange and the violet of the Bic markers are not in the same shade as the markers for the Copic and the Touch. It's not necessarily that the Bic markers are more vibrant, it's actually that they have a limited number of colors, and I will explain that more later. So it's not a reflection on the quality of the markers, just take that into consideration. Okay, so here is just a look at the markers. First off, the Touch Twin marker, which like I mentioned before is dual-ended. I do have the older version of this brand because I purchased these back in 2010, so I've pretty much had these pens for 5 years now. The brand has released a redesign of their product now and also released brush nibs for their markers. Then this is the Copic Chow marker, which is also dual-ended. You guys see me using this a lot in my other videos, and this is pretty much going to be the benchmark for the comparison of the two other brands. And I bought these back in 2012. Lastly is the Bic Market marker, which is not dual-ended. It does have a fine nib, and I also purchased these back in 2009 or 2010, so I've also had these markers for quite some time now. Okay, now it's time to compare the specifications of these three brands, and I just have a table here to show, I guess, the important factors we take into account when deciding which brand to purchase. First off is price, and I did calculate the price per marker for the Bic because they are sold in a set. I personally do not know if they can be bought individually. I haven't found a store that sells them individually, but if you know a store or an online shop that does, let me know in the comments because that would definitely affect my review about this brand. In Australian dollars, it would be around $1.20. Please note that these are only estimates and the prices vary from store to store. These are also not the retail price because I couldn't find the retail price for the Touch Twin markers, so I based them off an online store that sold both markers, and that'll just give a general idea of how much they differ in price. So the Touch Twin markers come in two types. The fine nib priced at $5.50 and the brush nib at $6. From looking at the pens, I'm assuming that they carry the same amount of ink as the Copic original markers, but once again, I couldn't find a website that listed how much ink the markers actually carry. I do know that the Copic marker products differ in the amount of ink it carries. There's the Copic original, which carries the most ink, the Sketch, and the Chow's, which carries the least amount of ink. The Sketch and the Chow markers have a brush nib, and the original has the bullet nib. So here are the prices. $8.25 for the Copic original, $8.30 for the Sketch, and $4.75 for the Chow, which is actually much cheaper than any of the Touch Twin products. Then we have the range of colors, with Bic carrying only 36 colors, Touch carrying over 200 colors, and Copic with more than 350 colors. And both Touch and Copic are actually adding more and more colors to their collection, which is great. For refills, only Touch and Copic are refillable, with $8.15 for a 20 ml refill bottle for Touch and $10.95 for a 25 ml bottle for Copic. And that actually calculates to be priced the same for both brands. All three of them are alcohol-based, which is why they're getting compared in this video. And lastly, only the Touch and Copic brand come with brush nibs as an option for their markers. So now onto the demonstration of the different brands. I will be coloring in this drawing 3 times. I've already photocopied this 3 times, and this will serve as the basis for comparing the results of using these products. Okay, I started with Bic kind of just going in the order of when I bought them, and there were a few things that went wrong with the coloring. First off, the violet was way too dark, which made blending the violet and the pink much harder than I had anticipated. I do own a pastel violet Bic marker, and if I had used that, it would have been much better, but I felt that the dark violet was closer to the violets I chose for the other markers. That's why I went for it. Anyway, it's not too bad. I just feel like it doesn't give enough justice to the marker, because obviously if you use a really dark color and try and blend it with a pale pink, even if you use Copics, it will still be hard to blend the colors together. So that was pretty much my fault. I should have chosen the pastel violet instead, but then again, that's the downside of this brand. It has a limited color selection, so achieving a nice transition of colors is harder. What I also noticed is that when I layer too many colors, the topmost layer ends up just sitting on the paper, which is fine because when you add another color, it helps with the blending. But then it ends up giving a blotchy texture to the surface after the colors dry. I've never experienced this with the Bic markers before, probably because I knew their limit when I used them and I never layered too many colors together. But aside from that, I really don't feel like the quality of these markers are horrible. I think you can create a solid and flat coloring with these markers, which you can achieve with alcohol-based markers, and that's why I definitely recommend this as a super cheap alternative. Next up are the Touch Twin markers. The only thing that went wrong with this demonstration was that I did not anticipate that the turquoise blue would run out of ink. When I swatched it, it looked fine, but I guess I was coloring a large surface, so I should have taken that into account. Once again, I feel like it didn't do too much justice to the marker's quality, because if I had enough ink on that one marker, I could have really shown how the light and dark blue blend together even without a middle color. Anyway, I was able to get better blending on the colors, especially on the violet flowers, because the violet wasn't too dark. Other than that, the ink of these markers actually give this nice effect that helps blend colors smoothly, even if they are not in the same color family. For example, if I layer a yellow on top of an orange, the orange actually fades, creating an in-between color, or a yellow-orange, which makes the transition much smoother. This does happen with the Bic markers as well, but I feel like it's not as much. However, this effect is definitely more evident with the Touch Twin markers and also with the Copic markers, which you will see later. Last, we have the Copic Chow markers. So I am using a brush nib, which really helps with blending the colors nicely compared to the bullet nib, which I used for the previous two brands. And the effect of the brush nib is clear on the pink flowers. Before, you saw me color the petals pink, then add blue to the inner part of the petal. With the previous drawings, it looked like a ring outside the yellow. It wasn't a very good blend, but with the brush nib, it doesn't look like a ring anymore. It's still not the best blend of colors because that's blending pink and blue together, which are very different colors, but it's much better than the harsh shading on the previous drawings. Aside from that, I don't really see a difference with this and the drawing I did with the Touch Twin markers. The quality is very similar, and like I said, it also gave that fading effect when layering a light color on top of a dark color. And so those are the demonstrations for the three brands. A little disclaimer, I am not an expert with these three markers, so it's possible that I have not used them to their full potential. Just keep that in mind. There might be some hidden tricks and techniques that other artists use and I haven't discovered yet that would make the Bic markers act exactly like the Copic markers. We never know. Anyway, so that's what I think about the markers. Ultimately, it's up to you to decide what brand and product you're going to use for your own artworks, whether it's the Bic, Touch, or the Copic brand, or maybe any other brand that's not mentioned in this video, because I'm sure there are heaps. So, if you are a starting artist and you recently found out about Copic markers or graphic markers and would like to try them but can't afford them or unsure whether you like them or not, then I recommend the Bic Market markers. They are very cheap and can give you a general idea about how alcohol-based markers behave. Then you can decide if you like markers or not, and if you don't, then you only wasted $1.20 for each marker. However, if you have recently discovered graphic markers and you're sure you want to use them for many years, then I recommend either the Touch Twin markers or the Copic markers. Deciding between these two is really up to personal preference. I personally go for Copic markers because back in 2010, Touch Twin markers didn't have a brush nib, were not refillable, and did not come with a wide range of colors. That's why I opted for the Copic Chows. But now, Touch Twin markers have gotten better and better as a brand, so I'd really say that it's up to you. What are you looking for in a marker? Do either of these brands satisfy that need? When you've looked into other possible brands out there, then you can decide which brand has that one vantage point that is able to sell their product to you. And it doesn't even have to be a tangible benefit, because I also chose Copics because I knew I could trust it. It's an established brand, and the fact that they've been around for that length of time and that people have raved about them ensured that I would also like them. So that's my 2 cents. I know both of these are expensive, but like I said, if you're sure you're going to use these markers for more than 10 years, then consider this an investment. And yeah, so that is it for this video. I hope this all made sense and that it was helpful for some of you who are thinking of using markers for their art but can't decide on what to buy, or would like to know what brands I started with before purchasing the Copic markers. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos. Also, feel free to check out the links in the description box for any of my social media. I've got Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Tumblr. That is it. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one.